community documents and speakers. And thank you so much for coming. We hope you keep coming. We want to start the dialogue going. And first of all, I want to thank the Hawaii Community College for donating the money for the pizzas and drinks. And thanks to them. I also want to thank Marigel for the ASL interpreter that we have today. I want to announce some upcoming events, but first of all, I want to start with Auntie Trina, who wants 10 seconds.
Yeah, just 10 seconds. There, in connection with, I'm still eating pizza, sorry. Birthday on the 21st is a drum percussion workshop. Drumming workshop. With Hope Medford, and she's with Medicine for the People. So there's actually only 4 slots left, so if you're interested, let me know, because you have to be registered to attend. Thank you, and it's at the old gym at 2 p.m. on the 21st.
Thank you.
You should be a student.
Okay. For Global Hope and for a lot of people, April is the environment because of Earth Day being originally April 22nd. So we're going to do everything we can for the environment, with the exception of next Thursday, where we're going to show a video, a documentary called The 13, and it's on April 13th, but it's about the 13th Amendment. And it's this video documents the blatant racism and corporate exploitation of the U.S. criminal justice system. And the main thing that is going to be of value is also our discussion afterward and what we're going to do about the way our country is going. The week after that, 2 weeks from tonight, Global Hope will co-sponsor with the UHH Geography Department, and they're going to be bringing a speaker. His name is Matthew K. Lynch. He's the whole UH Systems 10-campus sustainability coordinator, and he's going to be speaking on the power of students of the environment to catalyze transformative change. It's a how-to guide. And so that will be in 2 weeks from tonight. Then on the 27th, we have Leonardo DiCaprio's and Martin Scorsese's terrific movie, Before the Flood. And that will be on the 27th. But the most important thing, I think, for all of us to participate in, I'm going to ask Kaike Moore to come up here and announce the Climate March.
Hey everybody, hope you guys are having a good night. I'm just going to do a quick announcement too. If you have a seat between you that is not saved and want to scoot in closer, there's a lot of people who are looking for seats trickling in. My name is Kaikea, and I'm organizing the Climate March with some friends, and we would like you guys to come. So if you're inspired tonight by the discussion and want to do something more, please bring your signs and your energy. It will be April 29th, and there are flyers on the table. So thank you.
Thank you.
It says downtown Moya Park.
Yes. Yes. How many of you were at the Women's March? You know, let's bring even more people to the Climate March because it communicates right straight to Washington, D.C. They count us. Okay. And now I'm going to introduce my husband, Chris Ewan, who will introduce our dear friend, Mike Wilson.
Hello, everyone. Whoops. Second time. Aloha, everyone. Thanks for coming. And this evening we have our speaker, Mike Wilson. Most of you know him as a justice of the state Supreme Court. He was appointed in 2014. I thought I'd start by introducing him by talking about a little bit about his career before he was appointed to the State Supreme Court. Mike was raised on Oahu, attended Kailua High, became an attorney, and they say that maybe the best way to know who a person is to look at what they do or what they've done. And in Mike's case, as an attorney, he did a number of things that are out of the norm. He represented farmers here on the Big Island whose crops were poisoned by a chemical benlate that was produced by DuPont. Major mitigation and was eventually very successful in getting compensation for those farmers. He represented women who had been discriminated against or sexually harassed in employment. And perhaps the most prominent thing he did was represented the Save Sandy Beach Coalition in Oahu. This is one of the major land use fights of the late 1980s, early 1990s, worked for the Save Sandy Beach Coalition pro bono at that time. He then became chair of the State Department of Land and Natural Resources and brought a new emphasis on the environment and on sustainability in his time as chair of the Department of Land and Natural Resources. So Mike is going to speak tonight on maybe the biggest issue, the gravest threat to the planet that we have, global warming, and he's going to talk about his work with some of the most important judges in other countries around the world. But he remains the kind of person, as I can tell you and as I've seen, who will grab a garbage bag and help pick up broken glass off of Mahaiulu Beach, or make friends with the guy that collects your money as you exit from the parking lot. So without any further need for introduction, Mike, will you come?
Aloha, everybody. Aloha. You know, it's really great to listen to Chris make these things up and say things about me, but one of the main reasons I'm here is because of Chris and Noelle, and I get a chance to listen to them. It's very nice of you to come listen to me, but what a blessing for Hilo to have both of them here, and they have been... really entertaining sidekicks for me for well over 30 years. So, why am I wearing, you know, I grew up in Kailua, why am I wearing this suit? It's partly because of the message. The message being that this is a really global issue. This is a suit that's made out of linen that's raised. The linen, it's a result of crops that are grown by the poor people of India, who are now very much on the minds of a select group of people, much like you in India, that are trying to do what they can to reduce their carbon footprint and save the planet. The planet is, in large part, why I'm here. But I have to say that having gone to so many places on the planet in the last 2 years to deal with climate change, what's happening to the earth, and lawyers and judges, and that would be China and Korea and India and Brazil and Chile. Never have I appreciated a place like Hilo more. I am so excited to be here because this is, you know, the most incredible place on earth, Hawaii, and Hilo has a heart that beats as much as a heart can beat, that's close to nature and close to the real values of Hawaii. So I'm very grateful to be here, and I thank you for inviting me to be here. Okay, so what I'm talking about today is, as I said, a global issue, and the global issue is an issue that always involves Hawaii, because we are in the minds of the collective human consciousness that can think globally more than any other place on earth. We represent the idea of an ideal environment on a planet that is deteriorating rapidly. And so this is why, as you'll see, the world in a way has embraced Hawaii, even though we have one of the most challenged natural resource management programs in the United States. These are a couple pictures from space, and this is an astronaut who I'll never forget that appeared in my office. He appeared in my office after somebody from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Office said, Chuck Brady's here, he's been in space longer than anybody in history. This was back in 1995, and he came to Earth. When he came back to Earth, he wanted to fulfill his pledge to himself to deal with his anxiety and stress, because when he was in space, watching the Earth rotate every hour, when he was on his exercise bike, he saw the Earth deteriorating. Fires, silting of major rivers, and it was clear that this is a fragile planet, and he wanted to thank those that were taking care of what he saw as the most beautiful spot on Earth. Now, being at the Department of Land and Natural Resources, as I say, I realize that we are one of the most underfunded states in the United States. It is one of the most unusual puzzles of Hawaii that we have heroic people at the Department of Land and Natural Resources, because they have one of the worst budgets in the United States, and they don't give up and they do their best. So Chuck Brady was quite surprised when he found out how tough it is to try to take care of natural resources here, and he volunteered to help because he had seen this magnificent state as the most beautiful place on Earth. Wherever I go, I show these slides because people just immediately think my presentation was a great one. It doesn't matter what I say. Just if I show those slides at the beginning of the presentation, they just think it's great. I talked about the Department of Land and Natural Resources. Let me broaden it. You know, this is a fantastic audience. I know you. I know the school that you go to. I mean, I know the community. I understand what I'm going to say is speaking to the converted. But you make a difference. This is just a male heroic figure, Zeus, and a female heroic figure, Joan of Arc. And this is what is going to save our planet. Fancy laws, educated judges, those are secondary. What's going to save our planet could be somebody right here in the audience. But it depends on the people that step forward and don't give up. Nature-driven leadership. I know that's an easy idea for you. Somebody who works on something, cares about it, makes a commitment, maybe even a life commitment because of a larger good, because of an altruism. And we've all seen it with respect to people that we love in our families. You'll do anything for them. And then we've had a history in Hawaii of social conscience where we'll step forward and take care of those who were discriminated against. Now, there's a form of powerful leadership that's nature-driven, where people have decided they are going to protect the planet. And one reason why it involves heroism or sacrifice is it's not a moneymaker. What side of the issue are you on if you're on the side of the planet? Not big industry, and not the corporations, and oftentimes not the politicians. This is one of my favorite books, A Story Like the Wind. And Lawrence Vanderpost is a beautiful writer, and he writes about his Africa that he grew up in, and the beauty of it, and the power of it. But the story like the wind is a concept of a story that's so powerful. It carries a premonition with it. Like the animals that move out of a forest before the storm comes, and people can't tell the storm is there. Like the fish move in a certain direction before the shark arrives. Climate change is the ultimate story like the wind for the human race. Well, we're all saying the same thing right now. Really? He's not there anymore? I mean, Barack Obama was a nature-driven guy. He got it. And he became the leader. He became the one that over and over again would say things like, There's one issue that will define the contours of this century more dramatically than any other, and that is the urgent and growing threat of a changing climate. He had seen war, and he has seen terrorism, and he's seen human trafficking, and he's seen illegal arms sales. This is what he identifies as the #1 issue, and it helped because it got the attention of China, among others. This is the former Secretary General of the United Nations. You would consider him to be sort of a straightforward representative of the human race, and he says, climate change is the defining issue of our time. Mitigating climate change and adapting to its effects are necessary to eradicate extreme poverty, reduce inequality, and secure equitable, sustainable economic development. The scope of climate change is so broad that the Secretary General of the United States appeared with, and thank you for your climate march, but there was a climate march in New York that he participated in with 300,000 people where he said, there is no plan B because we only have one planet. We have to pay attention to climate change. How about the core value that runs the world? Jobs, euphemistically speaking. Money in the economy. Who is one of the giants that's in charge of the traditional Western economy? The president of the World Bank. He says climate change will lead to fights over water and food. In the next 5 to 10 years, this is a grounding so that those of you in the room that get accused when you speak to people about climate change as being sort of talking about soft science. Or why don't you set your priorities straight and get a job? Or whatever the term is to distract you. When you say we've got to do something about climate change, you can think of this gentleman who is a hardcore Western economic thinker. So I wear this suit. In some ways I wear it also because it's Asian and to make the point. If I could ask any of you to use your connections and do one thing in your life, and you happen to have a connection to the President of China, I'd ask you to do something because this is the country and this is the man that more than anybody on earth will decide our future. I've been to China and I've seen things that I could talk to you about and without being able to persuade you and have you understand how dramatic it is over there. They have poisoned, they have killed, they have created a kind of demoralized community that won't take it anymore. That's his problem, and that's why he is taking it seriously, and that's why China is moving on this issue, regardless of what anybody else does. Well, they've rewritten their constitution to require an eco-civilization, and this gentleman, the president of China, got together with Barack Obama and created the pact that I'll talk about. That's one of the most remarkable pacts that has legally occurred during the history of the human race. What are we talking about here? What is it that makes climate change so unusual? The solution horizon. In other words, you can look at the horizon of where we're going based on scientific evidence and based on the legal framework, which I'm going to talk about. What's the horizon? The horizon is 2 degrees. Once you get to 2 degrees, things will happen that are so dramatic that we're trying to avoid them right now, and I'll speak more about that, but it's a good thing to think about what's driving this as such an extraordinary issue. We only have maybe 50 years in order to fend off global warming up to 2 degrees. 2 degrees what? That's 2 degrees Celsius compared to before the Industrial Revolution, which was around the end of the 1800s. That's when we went industrial, and that's when carbon started going up into the air. There he is, and this is the agreement I referred to, the Paris Agreement. Before this Paris Agreement, in December 2015, the President of the United States and the President of China got together and said we have to do something, committed themselves to this Conference of the Parties, and then the Conference of the Parties became a real thing. 197 countries agreed, believe it or not, to reduce carbon based on scientific evidence, reduce carbon so that the Earth would not heat up to 2 degrees. Holding the increase in global average temperature to well below 2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels, and to pursue efforts to limit the temperature increase to 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels, recognizing that this would significantly reduce the risks and impacts of climate change. So you can see the 2 degrees in terms of Fahrenheit is 3.6 degrees, which is what we normally think of. This is a chart that you might find helpful. I usually check out when I see a chart like this, so if you want, you can take a rest, but I'll explain to you. All it really shows is, this is carbon in the air, the end of the 1800s. This is carbon in the air. You can see the increase. Now we're at 1% centigrade, we're above 1%, now we're almost at 1.5, but really, when somebody says to you, come on, there's no real evidence that humans are causing climate change. Well, what happened other than the industrial era and humans putting carbon in the air that made the temperature go up then? It just doesn't work anymore for climate change deniers who have to face the reality of science. Tipping point. 1.5 to 2 degrees Celsius. This is Professor Brandon Mackey, who I've had the pleasure to hear many times, and he's basically trying to come up with analogies about what happens when you get to 1.5 or 2 degrees. So if you think of your body, what happens when you get tired? And you get better pretty quickly. And then what happens if you start getting a cold? It takes a while to get better. Then what happens if you get a fever? It takes a little bit longer. Then what happens when you get Ebola? You know, it's no longer incremental, right? If you get Ebola, it might be all over. So one way to think about it is, at 2 degrees, the Earth will be as challenged and as sick as it has ever been since people have been part of it. 255 members of the National Academy of Sciences say there is compelling, comprehensive, and consistent objective evidence that humans are changing the climate in ways that threaten our societies and the ecosystems on which we depend. These words like threaten, or the words like an imminent danger, have great legal meaning, because it means that courts have more power to take action. And people like E.O. Wilson, if you could raise your hand, have you ever heard of E.O. Wilson? Okay, that's very interesting, because he is one of the most famous scientists in the world. He's sort of the father of conservation biology, and he is a winner of the Pulitzer Prize and just an extraordinary professor at Harvard. And he is one of the prime, if you will, communicators about climate change. And he's talking about here biodiversity that we have, and how we'll be down to half the species of plants and animals by the end of the century if we keep up at this rate. Stephen Hawking, raise your hand if you've heard of Stephen Hawking. Okay, that's really interesting. It helps me, because a lot more people have heard of Stephen Hawking than E.O. Wilson. Okay. Now, Stephen Hawking, I think you could say, everybody agrees, is a pretty grounded guy who is famous for having made mathematical predictions that work. So just look for a second at what he says about this. Global warming. A rise in ocean temperature would melt the ice caps and cause a release of large amounts of carbon dioxide from the ocean floor. Both effects could make our climate like that of Venus, with a temperature of 250 degrees. Gets me back to the tipping point. And it also is helpful to think, now that we're moving our minds a little bit towards that horizon, trying to figure out what's going to happen, and we've spoken a bit about biodiversity. Now, if you talk about disease, what's going to happen to all those little organisms that we are continually resisting in terms of plagues? And you can see at 2 degrees, there'll be significant increases in bird flu, Ebola, plague, tuberculosis, malaria, dengue fever, Lyme disease, cholera. This has caused the Center for Disease Control and Prevention to put together a chart. When the federal government puts together a chart, there is something serious going on, if it's a big chart like this. You could work on this chart for, hours. The impacts are extraordinary. And what does this mean? This is an interesting concept in accountability because, once you understand that you're not supposed to run out into traffic as a human being, if you run out into traffic, you are held accountable. Once you understand as a government leader that the train is about to leave the tracks and go over the cliff for the people that are, say, 40 years or younger, you have an obligation. This is our government telling us what's going to happen. And the drama and the severity that's involved is something that each of you will make a decision about in terms of the extent to which you're going to participate in doing something about it, either voting or marching or at a more personal level, the way that you keep your carbon footprint small. So from that point of view, now that we've got some background, let's talk about resource management, which is a fancy word for how do you handle the earth if you're in charge and you're trying to put a policy together to protect it. So there are three, loosely speaking, management ideas, approaches, programs. So one is the exploitation model. HEVA. The word's not completely there anymore, but HEVA, which is, bad, really bad. And what does it mean? Why would we say Nigeria? Because Nigeria is an interesting model. In Nigeria, there is an elite, a powerful elite, and they work with the major corporations that are extraction corporations in terms of mining and forest, and they maximize the extraction of the resources. And they create enormous wealth, really fast. And the wealth concentrates, of course, in the elite. And as you know, they're a terrorist group now that's getting more and more powerful. And as you probably know, the degree of environmental contamination of the citizens is extraordinary, and there are lakes that are completely polluted. But it's a virtually overt idea that you need to take advantage of the value of your resources while you can. Don't wait, because then that particular resource might not be valuable any longer. The sustainability model, if you've heard the concept of sustainability about taking care of the earth, raise your hand. Great. Okay, everybody knows this is a traditional model. As Chris said, when we were at the Department of Land and Natural Resources, this was a way to try to tell the legislature we'd like to sustain Hawaii's natural resources. And we would wear buttons. One of the great heroes of the Department of Land and Natural Resources, who worked tirelessly to protect the marine ecosystem on the Big Island, despite the fact that there was very little funding, is here today, Bob Nishimoto, who was a big inspiration to me. I won't ask you to stand up, Bob, because I know how humble you are, and you'll run out of the room if I say anything more about you. But anyway, so we would be telling the legislature we need resources to sustain the natural resources of Hawaii. But at the same time, we would be overt about how much we're hypocrites. Because we're asking the legislature, and in a way suggesting that we're sustaining the resources, which is just not possible when you consider the funding that's available. But that's the sustainability model, no good. And then the third model, which has been embraced by some countries, like Switzerland and Norway and New Zealand, is you identify your resources that are a treasure to you, or your culture, and you restore them. You make them better. Where are we? Well, we certainly know we're not at the restoration model. But in Hawaii, it's your state, it's our state, and if you are younger than 40 years old, you're about to see something that I know I really can't imagine, and I won't get to see it. But in about 40 or 50 years, there's going to be some dramatic things happening to the place that the people on Earth think of collectively as the most ideal environment on Earth, and it's our home. Are we at the Nigerian model or the sustainability model? Maybe during your lifetime, not during mine, you'll get to the restoration model. So let's fast forward 50 years. If we fast forward 50 years, we'll see that the Nigerian model, this is us. We're riding the Nigerian model. There's no question about it, according to Stephen Hawkins and responsible scientists. We're riding the Nigerian model. And so we can see already certain things that are happening, not just the glaciers melting and the Arctic ice melting and polar bears starving, but in India, this is a picture that was in the paper a couple months ago when 5,000 schools were closed. 5,000 schools. The Nigerian model implies something more than just the destruction of natural resources. It describes something in terms of social justice. Now we can talk at this point, and I know Noelle has actually taught me a lot of this, but we'll talk about something that's really exciting in a way, which is, this is a very easy solution. All we have to do is take carbon out of the air. That is comforting. But the other thing that is so important to keep in mind is, why do we keep the carbon there? Because who suffers? Right now we have 7 billion people. By the year to 2100, we're supposed to have 11. 7 billion people. How many are children? A lot. 2 billion. How many children are employed? Very, very few. Okay. How many people on Earth make more than $250 a day? Very, very few. Very few. Why do we have carbon in the air? Because we want to make sure we have jobs. They don't have jobs. It's so bad that they had to close down 5,000 schools in India. And so there's a movement in India that says this. There's no question. We will do whatever we need to get the poison out of the air because we don't want to poison our children. And how hard is it? Now we know it's not that hard because the social dislocation, the loss of jobs that's going to take place is not so profound that the world economy is going to collapse. Much to the contrary, renewable energy is a huge industry now. So if we take carbon out of the air because, and everybody here in this room is certainly able to do the formula in your mind and do the thought process. Okay, so we're not going to burn fossil fuels. Wow. Wow. That was easy. But we have to burn fossil fuels even though we're poisoning most of the children. And will continue to make life more difficult for the poor and for children, just because we have to keep carbon in the air. So let's move to the privileged, the rich, and I mean the blessed. Everybody in this room. Every time I wake up, I really do say a prayer of thanks. It's incredible to live in Hawaii and to have all the food we need and to have good friends and not have people trying to hurt us. Temperature in Hawaii has quadrupled in the last 40 years. Here we go, global warming. Our watersheds, what I said about the Department of Land and Natural Resources. Now, this will empower some of you, and some of you are already empowered by this, but our watersheds, and I'm mostly talking about Oahu, produce the water. How many people knew that? Raise your hand. Right, a lot of people realize it's the watersheds that create the miracle of water for our state, and our engine of our state's on Oahu. So, the water seeps down to the aquifer that we take 100 million gallons of water a day from. Thanks to another heroic person of the Department of Land and Natural Resources, about 4 years ago, an amazing woman by the name of Emma Ewan convinced the governor that we needed to finally invest in our watersheds and therefore protect the watersheds from being eroded by doing things like putting up fences so that animals don't kill the plants. And bless her, that was Chris and Noelle's daughter, Emma Ewan. And look at this, and we should talk about how heroic she is. But if you move to New Zealand, oh my goodness, this would have been taken care of a long time ago. They would never let their watersheds deteriorate. They're trying to bring them back. Our watersheds have deteriorated half in the last 50 years. And so this aquifer is starting to be affected because we haven't been managing the watersheds, but also it's being affected because if you listen to the state meteorologists, we're not getting as much rain, and also because with sea level rise, the aquifer, which is an underground aquifer that actually sits like 100 millions of gallons a day of water is taken from this lens that basically sits on salt water. But when sea level rise happens, the salt water starts coming up and it intrudes into the fresh water. So the effects are that in the next 100 years, conservatively speaking, ocean levels are expected to rise 39 inches due to global warming. So that will submerge the Alawai, Hilton Hawaiian Village Lagoon, banks of the Alawai, most of the Alawai Golf Course. It's causing beach erosion. So this is, you don't see this that much in Hawaii. This is Malaysia. But you do see it. This is a letter to the editor. This past week, I took my mainland visitors to Sherwood's Beach in Waimanalo and was horrified by the amount of trash in the water. And then the letter goes on to talk about what it's like to be in the water with a lot of trash because it's uncomfortable and you might get hurt. This is not what Chuck Brady thought of when he was in space, and this is not what the collective human consciousness thinks is going on in Hawaii. Coral. Many scientists, marine scientists, say that, we have a nonprofit where we take children into the ocean and take them out in a canoe, and for the first time we ask them, what's the most important animal in the ocean? It's coral. You know, coral's the basis of the marine ecosystem, and also coral protects Waikiki, which is our godhead, right? So, with global warming comes warmer seas, and if I ask you to raise your hand if you've heard the term bleaching of coral, could you raise your hand? See, this is fantastic being here. You know, if I ask people in Chile about that, they just, you know, feel like I'm wasting their time. Okay. But if you move to Australia, where they have a Great Barrier Reef, as you know, that is one of their pride and joys, the scientists there are using this kind of term in terms of trying to let the planet know if we're going to protect the Great Barrier Reef, we need to get focused. With a war on global warming. Stress on native plants, that goes without saying as the temperature rises. Here's a Pearl Harbor aquifer, just another chart to show you, and it's declined by half since 1910. If we're going to truth test, are we the Nigerian model or are we on sustainability model? And we look at our most important resource, which is drinking water, and we ask ourselves at a very fundamental level, okay, what's happening to this resource? Is it going up? Maybe the restoration model? Or are we maintaining it? Which is what model? Sustainability. Or are we going the Nigerian route? I guess you can form your own conclusion. And this is a program that was put together on Oahu by community leaders to look at the water problems, and they said that we need to have 100 million gallons a day more of fresh water. The equivalent of what we're already drawing from the Pearl Harbor aquifer. And so, it's getting the attention of leaders. Sea level rise is a concern now of the mayor, who's putting a task force together to deal with global warming and the rise of sea level. So, especially those of you that are going to be around a long time, when you think about what your money is going to be used for as a taxpayer, other than rail, if you're on Oahu. Think about what a leader like the mayor would do when the ocean is rising. I can look inside the minds of people in Hilo that are in this room. And I have an idea what your answer will be when I ask you this question. But if you're the mayor, or you're the governor, or you're the dictator, or you're in charge, the ocean's going up, the hotels are being threatened, and the tourist industry. Now the tourist industry, we all know how powerful it is, but let me just give you an example. The tourist industry felt that there wasn't quite enough economic activity on Oahu for them, and so they convinced the legislature to use tax dollars to pay for a convention center that was $350 million. That's a pretty good subsidy. With that in mind, the tourist industry says, you need to do something about our hotels. You need to do something about the hotels. And what you need to do is put up a wall. They do it in places like the Netherlands. You put up a wall because our infrastructure is what pays for your economy. Now these interests aren't from Hawaii. You know, hotels aren't owned anymore by people from Hawaii. But you will have to decide if you're in charge. Do you say, fine, how much of a wall do you want? We'll just raise the tax dollars and we'll build a $200 million wall. Or do you say, we're in this for the public. I represent the public. Why is it helpful to the public to build a wall? Okay then, if you're not going to build the wall, you need to compensate us for the buildings because you're not doing your job. Really? What is the job of the public officials, your public officials? Is it to make sure that when a natural calamity is happening, that the tourist industry gets paid for? Or is it, okay, and that brings me to the really fascinating question about if you're going to represent the public, what do? Do you take down the building so you have a beach? Do you protect the coral that's off Waikiki, or do you just decide it's going to be covered up by a big wall? Because it is going to rise. And the economic impacts to the loss of Waikiki Beach due to erosion are considered to be about $2 billion a year. 10 years, that's $20 billion, right? So imagine the dollars that the tourist industry is going to say it's necessary to raise because they have to be protected. Our future. Truth tested. One way to truth test it is, what is your society most proud of? Our society. I mean, people are proud of their children, but there are some countries that are actually proud of things like their rivers. The Ganges River was just declared a living person by the courts so they could protect it. Well, what is it that we identify with as, if you will, our icons culturally that are so important? Is it the budget of the Department of Land and Natural Resources? Are we proud because we have a budget that allows for the state to be taken care of? Well, now we have something called the Environmental Court, which I'll talk about. But this is the hallowed ground of Hawaii. Our future is invested in rail, primarily, financially, but culturally the most important resource in terms of generating income, in other words, the most popular tourist destination and the place that visitors want to see the most when they come is the Arizona Memorial. Now in the future, it may be that somebody would like to say, you know, we have a world-class aquarium better than anybody else's because it protects the natural resources of Hawaii. Or it might be Waikiki Beach, which we have restored. Or it might be the watersheds, which we've restored. But that's one way to truth test whether we're going to the Nigerian model or the sustainability model, the restoration model. And maybe we'd be proud of the Nepali coast. We are proud in the sense that that's the way the world sees us. If you ever saw the budget to take care of the Nepali coast and compared it to a life resource in the rest of the United States, you'd think that maybe you were in what country? Okay. This 2 degrees is so powerful. The 5-degree drop led to towering masses of ice that covered the entire planet 20,000 years ago. Biodiversity. Climate change is expected to threaten with extinction approximately 1/4 or more of all land species. This is the International Union for the Conservation of Nature. The extinction rate is between 1,000 and 10,000 times higher than the normal extinction rate. So, the world community seeks help from the judiciary. This is one reason why Hawaii is standing out right now, because we have the only environmental court in the United States that's got broad jurisdiction, civil, criminal jurisdiction. Why do we have an environmental court? Because of trust. Some party, some group, some agency decided we needed it, right? So if you ask yourself who, and you say it was the legislature, that's sort of encouraging. The legislature decided we needed to have an environmental court so we could make better decisions dealing with the environment. Or the governor. Because when you consider why this should be happening, an environmental court, a new institution, you can think about the challenge we have of dealing with this social issue, and think about what's happening with courts and social issues in the past. Slavery, it went to court when we had slavery in the United States. The courts eventually entered decisions to stop slavery on behalf of citizens. Working conditions during the industrial era. Did the executive branch and the legislature come forward to protect men and women working in factories and children? The community did. And they had the laws passed. They put pressure on the government, and then the courts enforced those laws. And the same things happened with gender equity issues, control of monopolies, regulation of financial markets, pollution, domestic abuse, abortion. Where did the initiatives come? It came from citizens. And in this case, to deal with this climate crisis that has an obvious solution horizon to many of us, a crisis where we have to arrive at a solution within the next 40 or 50 years, the Environmental Court was created because of, and I often use this quote because it gets me back to what is really the most important thing. Somebody in this audience who's going to organize and devote your life to it, or join with others to do something about it. Mahatma Gandhi, I won't even ask you to raise your hand, we know who he is. He inspired Martin Luther King, and he was a guy who really didn't think he was necessarily going to win when he would keep sitting down in front of the British, engaging in nonviolent protest, but he believed with a group of core people in India, the most, or the second most, depending on your point in history, populated country, he thought that that country could overcome a power like the British Empire. This is the Environmental Court. A regular lady from Maui who was tired of seeing the beauty of Hawaii defiled. Who was tired, but not somebody that wasn't enthusiastic. She believed in the legislature, she believed in the governor, she thought it could happen, so she worked for years, and eventually a perfect storm occurred and the legislation was passed. Much like this gentleman, who I think will have somebody like him that your children will talk about as a spirit of an unquestionable faith that changed history. His grandfather was a slave. He became one of the great justices of the Supreme Court of Hawaii, and presided over a case that made it clear that having separate schools for people based on race isn't separate but equal. It's not equal, it's a violation of the Constitution's requirement that we have equal protection of all citizens. And this is one of the reasons that she came forward. The EL aquifer is being depleted on Maui. So, you have tools, we have tools that are so exciting in Hawaii, legally. And this is true around the world. Now, there are a lot of laws that have been passed by the grassroots, and here is part of our Constitution that's unique in the world. This is a provision that says Hawaii's natural beauty is a natural resource. Other constitutions refer to natural beauty, but not as the same level of significance as, see the resources listed here? Land, water, air, mineral resources. It says, for the benefit of present and future generations, the state and its political subdivisions shall conserve and protect Hawaii's natural beauty and all natural resources, including land, water, air, minerals. Now, most constitutions have land, water, air, minerals and the importance of protecting them, but not natural beauty. We also have a provision that says we have a right to a clean and healthful environment. A similar provision in India meant that the court ordered hundreds of thousands of cars off the road that were diesel cars in New Delhi. So here it is. This is the law that pertains to the environmental court. And the purpose that was stated for the environmental court is Hawaii's natural resources are compromised every day, resulting in numerous violations of the law. Okay, now we're being authentic. We're not just being aspirational and saying, you know, we really take care of our environment. We're being authentic and trying to do something about it. An environmental court will better ensure that the state upholds its constitutional obligation to protect the public trust for the benefit of all beneficiaries. That's in the law. So, the environmental courts have exclusive original jurisdiction over all proceedings, provided that upon the motion of a party or sua sponte by the Chief Justice may assign to the environmental courts issues before the courts. This basically means that potentially any issue that affects the environment could go before the environmental court. We have many, many statutes that are affected. This is just a list of the many statutes that describe natural resources. Our district court now has had 1,600 cases in the first 11 months, and the district court is the court that handles violations of things like illegal fishing, illegal hunting, illegal use of resources in parks. But at a circuit court level, that makes decisions on big issues like development, cases are mounting. And the governor has gotten involved. It's very exciting because this has become a popular issue, the environmental court, and he has assisted in developing a more sophisticated form of sentencing that allows for community service and community education for those that violate park regulations, resource violations. This is one of the giants of the law in Hawaii, universally respected. He's the chief judge on Maui, but he's just a wonderful guy. And he's not prone to making noise, raising his voice, saying things that are extreme. But he said that this environmental court is historic. Well, I'm getting to the end, but you share your life with some living thing other than a person that you care about. Some people go for birds, or dogs, or cats. Or coqui frogs, I suppose. But this is an amazing animal. This is my favorite. And it's hard to find them because they require a lot of space and they are dangerous and sometimes they eat people. But I looked for a long time in India and hiked around to find them and couldn't. And then once I was matched up with you know how Michael Jordan is to basketball or Tiger Woods was to golf? There is a tracker in India that works for the World Wildlife Foundation that doesn't speak English, but the World Wildlife Foundation of India was kind enough to have the ultimate tracker help me and my friend Raj Kumar, who's come and stayed with Chris and Noelle before. So when we saw the tiger, he said, there it is. And it was an incredible moment because I had always wanted to see a tiger, but I couldn't see it for like 20 minutes. Because when he saw it, it was lying down in the grass and you could just see the shadow of its head. But that was enough for me. But God intervened and decided it's time. So he got up, and then she got up, and then 2 other tigers got up, and they walked right in front of us. So, you know, this is a lot of rhetoric, and it's a lot of discussion about the law, and it's a lot of discussion about resource management theory, but really what it comes down to is, can we care like the people of India do? Enough about our relationship with God, enough about our relationship with nature, so that like in India, now I know we hear things about India being dirty and poor, but keep in mind, they have settled that part of the world longer than any other place on earth. They're the equivalent of Mesopotamia. They're the equivalent of Egypt, the Middle East. But if you go to Egypt in the Middle East, you will not find animals unless they're domesticated. Something happened, partly because of their relationship through their Hindu religion, but something happened so that despite all their troubles, they know that this is an important animal for them. Even if they don't see it, it's for them and for their relationship to nature. And they're saving it, and it's starting to come back. So at least when it comes to the tiger, they don't have the Nigerian model. If we can start carving out spots where we don't have the Nigerian model, if we can have the people who are, I mean, you know, you think about the leadership in this room. We tend to think because we're such a competitive place that maybe Hilo's a backwater, or maybe people here, you know, just aren't as educated or motivated or talented or whatever. But really, I mean, this is one of the most incredible places on earth. When you think of who your neighbors are, how interesting they are, and they're eccentric, but they're thoughtful. One of the points that is made by Raj Kumar from India, who's come to Hawaii many times. One of the points that's made by the President of the International Union for the Conservation of Nature that's from China. And a point that is being made by Dean Antolini, this great assistant dean at the University of Hawaii Law School, is we can lead. Hawaii can lead. We can lead right past climate change, right to restoration. We have the capacity to do it. Just think for a second about what happens on Molokai. How many hotels are there? There's a mindset. Think, for example, about how high you build buildings on Kauai. I mean, if we had the height limit on Oahu that they had on Kauai, you would think ISIS had arrived. And then you get to the Big Island. This place is alive. It's beautiful, with the spirit of the people as well as the land. So we can lead. And those individuals I just mentioned are individuals like the Chief Justice of India, who in his speech to about 500 judges 10 days ago when I was in India, or 2 weeks ago when I was in India, talked about 2 degrees. 2 degrees is unacceptable for India. He will not allow his people to die. The head of the Supreme Court of the most populated country in the world, except for maybe China. That's how committed he is. And in that speech he mentioned Hawaii. He'd been to Hawaii. And he'd been with the Environmental Court. Because, the reason he's saying that is because India has the most powerful environmental court. What do you think the response is of the executive branch and the legislative branch when the Supreme Court of India says, you have to stop rat hole mining where you're using children to dig the coal that's in the surface of the ground because you're violating regulations, and even more importantly, they're dying young, and even more importantly, it's contaminating the water table. So, this massive coal industry that's depending on rat hole mining, shut down. Like I said, the Ganges has been declared a living person by not the Supreme Court, a lower court, but nonetheless, the Supreme Court has ordered 200,000 cars off the road, and the Supreme Court has said a right to life includes a right to a clean and healthy environment, and as a result of, for example, stopping $1 billion shipment of iron ore that was supposed to land without appropriate regulations, there's a big backlash. So the Prime Minister of India and the party that's in power in Congress is trying to change the way judges are selected. But it's not working because the people identify that branch of government as their branch. In Hawaii, if I were to open your mind to what has just happened in the legislature, it would give you some food for thought, because a lot of the legislative effort with respect to the judiciary involved cutting the pensions of judges and allowing an additional participation of special interests in picking judges by allowing for the Senate to decide whether a judge should be retained. So they get to look at the decisions. Well, I guess the feeling in the legal community and the environmental community and the community that represents Hawaiian interests showed up. So the leadership, this didn't come from an eccentric member of the Senate or the House. This came from the leadership. The leadership didn't prevail this time. But it gets me back to the point about what is Hawaii about? We can lead. And I'm very excited about the future because I get to be in Hawaii, part of the future, but also because of the people that, make up our state. There are good people in the legislature. There are good motivations on the part of the leadership, but the judges that I get to work with are so inspiring. There are so many of them that are independent, and they read the law, and they decide what they're going to do is right. And I just really am putting in a bit of a plug for the fact that you've got an independent judiciary, and that's one way to think about the future. And you've got a whole series of laws that are powerful. That's another way to think about the future. But mostly it depends on the leadership of those who are willing to step forward on this issue of climate change. And I always end with this too. Now in India they have a concept called namaste, which I'm sure many of you have heard. Namaste sort of recognizes the life in a person. Sort of like aloha is a way of recognizing a bit of God in everybody. So when I am in India and I say aloha, it's really fascinating how many people really get it. And the audience usually goes, namaste. So, it's so wonderful to be here, be able to say aloha to all of you, and I'm very grateful that you were here to listen to me. I was told that I could have as many slides as I wanted, so you have to complain to Chris and Noelle if I overdid it with my slides, but I wanted to share a lot of things, so thank you. Down or it'll hurt your ears. But Noelle, should I take questions or are we going to go home now?
Take questions.
Okay. Should I give you the microphone?
No, I'm going to turn the lights on.
Okay. Okay, well.
Yeah, I forgot to say when I introduced Mike, though, he's going to take questions, but he is a judge, and that limits how candid you can be in some of your answers. So don't feel that he's dodging the question sometimes. It's just the way it is. It's a little hard to explain, but that's the way it is for a judge in answer. He'll let you know when you...
That's okay. Everybody might want to like run home because they've had to listen to me for so long. I don't know. Does anyone have any questions? Yes, sir.
Personally, lifestyle and diet choices for yourself, what do you do to make the biggest difference in your own life as far as lifestyle and diet choices to spread that message and that image?
The question was, what do I do with lifestyle and personal choices in terms of, I guess you're thinking about my carbon footprint and how is it that I conduct myself so that I'm a global citizen, so to speak. And so I confess I'm not the best global citizen. I do have a car, but I live very close to my office, and there are times when I do walk to my office. My form of recreation doesn't involve necessarily a jet ski, but I don't mind people that have jet skis. It doesn't necessarily involve paragliding, although it's fine. I mean, I'm not passing judgment. But anyways, I'm relatively low tech. For fun, I go in the ocean, do a lot of swimming and that kind of thing. And I do eat meat once in a while, but mostly I try to develop more and more of a diet in favor of vegetarianism, because everybody knows, you know, the amount of carbon that goes into raising an ungulate is huge. Yes, sir.
I'm a biologist, I studied biology, but it's actually true that the plants actually grow better in a climate that has a higher carbon dioxide percentage of the air. Anyway, how do you explain that with this thing? Anyway, it's very interesting contrast to the whole scene.
Well, I mean, I think you have to look at it as a whole. How are the plants doing? It's not as though forests are thriving with acid rain. It's not as though forests are thriving and restoring themselves because of changes in the atmosphere. There's a change in precipitation, so they need water. It's not. So I guess my point is, it's not just the warming that makes a difference. But, you know, it's not all hopeless. I mean, there are countries, and I've mentioned some of them, where forest cover is coming back, but it's not where we have our biggest forests, where the lungs of the earth are, right, which is the Amazon. Yes, sir.
Yes, thank you for your talk. I really appreciated it. I want to say, however, I want to preface this, first of all, by saying I teach philosophy here, and I've been teaching environmental philosophy for the last 5 years, and we've been focusing on this problem pretty intensely, so I've been doing a lot of research on it, and I have to say I think that the situation is far worse than you're portraying it, which I understand why you're having to portray it the way that you are, but I think people ought to realize that we are at the tipping point. Right, we really are, and the most alarming thing I've seen lately is what Arctic climate scientists are saying that is going on this winter, this December, with temperatures 40, 50 degrees above normal, and that we're likely to have an ice-free Arctic either this summer or next. And once that happens, once we have an ice-free Arctic, climate change is going to start to become exponential. So we're going to start feeling dramatic impacts, I think, within the next 5 years. And so I think that, you know, the idea of the courts being able to help us, I mean, as much as they can, yes, but we don't have 50 years. And I think that our only hope, I think, is if we have a massive effort, like on the scale of the armament during World War II, or the moon program, or something like that, to get us off of burning fossil fuels. And the technology is there. That's what's in the Before the Flood film. Elon Musk explains that, you know, they build these solar gigafactories, 100 of them can power the whole planet. And there's enough, I mean, we do have the technology, but this is going to take a massive investment. And I'm wondering what you think about that. How is that going to be possible? That's our only hope.
Okay, well, your premise, which is that it's a severe enough situation that there has to be a massive movement now, I have no problems with, and you expressed it really well. And it's true, I can't give you the position, for example, that Tom Lovejoy, who's the father of biodiversity, some people say. He's a brilliant scientist, educated at Yale, he's a well-known professor, he's a leader in these issues, and he says At 2 degrees, we'll have no coral, but at 3 degrees, the devastation will be catastrophic. It'll be difficult for human society to remain stable. Okay, so that was part of your point, that things are getting bad quickly. And then the second idea was, it kind of inferred, is there a possibility of like a massive movement? And I would cite China in the sense that they are an autocratic community that we wouldn't want to be part of, but they have decided they've got to deal with climate change. And therefore, they are committed to cutting their carbon. So they'll provide an example. When I was there, here's just an example of the epic thinking that they engaged in. When I say they, I'm talking about the Chinese leadership and their sort of intellectual community. They are deep thinkers. And one of their points about the future that they want for China in a clean industry is big data. Right? The energy that's needed for, and the pollution that's accompanying the idea of gigantic, right now they're gigantic, but gigantic servers that store data and process it for the world community is a really relatively clean industry. So they've decided they're going to take over that industry, and they have built a gigantic, and I use that term specifically, it's a data center that they've dug into a very large mountain. So they don't have to use the energy to air condition it. They have, in the city that I was in, they planted hundreds of thousands of trees, they picked a specific species for the different ecosystems, and they have a database for each one of them. They have moved hundreds of thousands of people who I would fight very hard to keep them from being moved, but the fact is they moved very, very poor people that are burning fossil fuel, right? Poor people burn wood. So they've taken them out of the countryside, partly because that will free up some land now that isn't contaminated, because so much of their agricultural land is contaminated, and they've moved them onto the grid in these giant buildings, so that they are engaging in energy consumption that's provided by, you know, fill in the blanks, their biggest companies or their country. So that's one point. The other thing is, I think there's a bit of a cyclical effect that takes place. You know, we decided that we were going to do something about ozone and everybody fell into place. We decided that we had to do something about nuclear energy when many people said, you know, human beings are just so disorganized, and in some ways they're so antisocial that they hurt each other all the time. You know, they can't drive their cars very well. I mean, it's inevitable we're going to blow ourselves up with nuclear power, but we didn't. And so this cyclical effect that comes from seeing a solution and getting on the bandwagon, I think, is very possible. And if you combine what happens with the internet and somebody like Barack Obama, just think about Barack Obama as such an unlikely occurrence, right? Because the reason he ended up being elected was because he had this alternative funding source through the internet. And then he ends up being, he could have, and he did get momentum going. It could have been cyclical. Talking about, we need to shut down the coal industry. That is a big industry. You can see how much influence it's had on the present president, right? So he is capable, people like him are capable of getting the momentum going, and then at a certain point, I think that the millennials are very important. You know, human beings, especially in developed countries that are being left behind, we're in a time of great wealth creation in the world, and in the United States, and in Hawaii. But the way the wealth is being concentrated is starting to become more evident to young people that don't have opportunities. So they're getting more involved. And one of the agendas of young people these days, you could say even the prevailing agenda politically, is the environment. And they could pass laws. For example, laws that have been passed. Take, for example, the law that, has everybody here heard about the law that says we're supposed to go to alternative energy use by 2045, renewable energy? Well, that's pretty extraordinary. I mean, it's a very dramatic thing that gets, that gets a lot of attention. So that type of thing could happen. And it's really good to keep it. I know we all discussed this, but it's a good thing to remind people if they start acting hopeless. We're not talking about stopping bigotry. Bigotry, racism is so ingrained. It takes a long time. All we're talking about is getting the carbon out of the air. It has a discrete solution that's not meant to be personal, right?
Can I make a quick follow-up?
Yes.
A follow-up question. I heard that there's a pilot program on Kauai on solar power, a major, one of these, I guess not a mega...
One of the utilities?
Major solar...
Yeah.
Is there, the Tesla.
Okay, right.
Tesla
Well, and then
do you know about that? Is there...
I don't.
or is
I
there
don't.
that on
I
that island?
can't speak to that. Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
These large pieces of land that the Conservancy, and most especially our national parks, are now endangered. Are they very important in this whole climate change that we have these tracts of land, that we have these have preserved in Africa and other places? I heard now that the parks are going to be in America are going to be sanitized.
Well, the question had to do with the future of lands like the lands that Nature Conservancy, which is a large conservation organization, owns, and they often buy very sensitive ecosystems to protect them. And you referred to Africa, and a lot of the work that's being done involving the environmental courts is under the United Nations, and in a lot of the places where I have been that involve Africa and African judges, they do speak about how climate change is a difficult issue for them because the population is so poor and they're not all that educated, so they don't get the same level of response when there's a discussion about how rainfall is not sufficient to support the same populations in the major parks like Kruger National Park in South Africa. But it's growing. I mean, they are getting growing support, but I think there's no question that the overall deterioration of wilderness areas is something that is, it's really important, and it's hard to describe how important it is. E.O. Wilson does. E.O. Wilson is this famous biologist I was mentioning that's trying to now have governments set aside wilderness areas just so that there'll be forest cover and there'll be biodiversity. Okay, we've got lots of questions. All right, we'll go to people that haven't asked questions. Yes, sir.
You're well positioned to address a concern that seems to me to be a war that's looming. We're basically talking about carbon, which affects the entire planet. So the idea of externalizing costs by releasing carbon into the air from the ground is something that requires like a point of extraction tax type of thing, as opposed to a complex set of legislation that requires oversight. The problem with that, which brings you into this, is how do we craft legislation and structure such that we maintain regional autonomy while implementing a global tariff on pollution?
Well, I guess the COP21 agreement would suggest that it might be possible to move ahead with this idea of a carbon tax and do it in a way that's global.
Well, how does that just not push all the manufacturing to Indonesia or Iran?
Well, I mean, I'm not at the negotiating table, but Indonesia and Iran may have an interest in going along with it. For example, with COP21, the idea that we're going to limit industrial development isn't really very attractive to a developing country.
Right.
So the developed countries have committed to spending $30 billion a year on mitigation and adaptation for the developing countries. You know, they're negotiating techniques like that. Yes, and it really isn't that much when you consider what's involved, but I'm just saying this, this happened. You had all these countries come together and enter into an agreement, and it's something that has to continue to be worked at, but I wouldn't think that the carbon tax idea is one that's not viable simply because it's not going to be implemented throughout the world.
Oh. Well, what percentage of the world would have to be involved in order for it to be viable?
Well, if you had China and India and the United States, that would be a lot. You know, that's more than half of the carbon footprint of the
So
world.
kind of an anchor tenant model?
Which is what happened with COP21, right? You had the United States and China say, we're going to commit to reducing carbon, and we're going to commit to doing it in the context of 2 degrees.
Commit to a carbon tax.
They didn't know, and this, I guess, I don't know if it's Tom Lovejoy, but you know, it's a very important idea that is being worked on by people as a life's work.
Yeah.
You know, you probably know that. I mean, if you read about it, there are formerly, you know, heads of like the NASA who stopped being head of NASA. I think that's who it was, and was devoting himself to a carbon tax because he thinks it's a straightforward way to solve the problem. You know. In the back, yes, ma'am.
Hi, thank you for coming this evening. I wanted to ask your opinion on, in order to maintain our environment and the beauty of our state, how many people can we support?
Well, the question was how many people can we support, I guess, and still have a healthy environment globally? And those figures are available. The calculation of the number of people, loosely speaking, that the planet can support is something like 10 billion, oddly enough. And if you want to get to a discussion of that, you can just look up E.O. Wilson. He's probably the leading authority on that in the world. And he has a discussion about how we're headed in the direction of, he thinks the population could stabilize, so we're heading in the direction of, in the distant future, maybe being able to get population under control globally, but as you know, the population is declining in Europe and declining in Japan, and it's going to be, it is pretty much stabilizing in the United States, but it would be declining if it wasn't for immigration. So that is the beginning of the world population potentially stabilizing if, and this is a very interesting sort of consensus among population scientists, if women are given equal opportunity. E.O. Wilson will say, as a population scientist slash, you know, evolutionary biologist, that the most important thing that's happened in human history to protect the planet was equal opportunity for women. And there was a concern when that started happening, for obvious reasons. But there were, you know, social scientists, population scientists that felt that was going to be the opposite, because when women had more income, more financial independence, they would do what women really want to do, which is to just have children, have more children. And it just didn't prove out that way. Yes, ma'am.
I'd like to talk about bicycles as transportation.
Yes, bicycle.
And ecotourism.
Yes.
I grew up on Oahu. I rode my bike until I was 35 years old and didn't own a car.
Great.
I caught the bus. It was
Yeah.
25 cents for adults, 10
Yeah.
cents for kids. You know, we wanted from Railroad to Hilo a bikeway. You know, we could have it around the island where
Right.
no cars go.
Right.
It would be a real eco draw, and I'm wondering if there's any way you can help with that, or if you have some ideas around that.
Well, I mean, all I can do, you know, I'm allowed to help on something like that at a puny, empathetic, personal level and say that, you know, it seems to me it's an incredibly good investment, right? But I can't do anything in terms of lobbying because it would be unethical. I can't actually do any formal lobbying or...
Just connections of different people to send letters to, give presentations to. I mean, it could be solar showers, commuting to work by bicycle. I mean, we have a huge obesity problem worldwide or in the
United States for sure.
Yeah.
And it could be a draw, you know, how people come for the marathon. People,
Oh, yes.
You know, anyway, I just think that that's something that's doable.
Right.
I no longer ride a bike because it's too dangerous.
Yeah.
And I don't want to breathe the exhaust in cars.
Right. Well, I should tell you about Tony Oposa. Do you know about Tony Oposa from the Philippines and his movement? You'll see him right away when you look on the internet. So Tony Oposa is from the Philippines, which some people would say is a failed society because it's poor and there's a lot of corruption. But it's not completely. And he's a lawyer who established in their court a very important principle for the first time on earth, which is he went to court to sue on behalf of children, yet unborn children, using his own children as representatives to stop illegal deforestation. And the Supreme Court of the Philippines recognized that cause of action. Certainly it would be very difficult for courts in the United States to embrace that at this point. Well, he also said, why are the people of the Philippines being discriminated against by cars? Why is the government discriminating against us? Because, I mean, it's true in the United States too. I don't know how many people can afford a car, but a lot of people can. But in the Philippines, not that many people can. However, all of this public expenditure goes to roads for cars. And he said that's not fair. We need to accommodate the people that are riding bikes. So the government said, okay, so they set aside the roads on a certain day for bikes. Because it's so true. I mean, it's not as though when they set aside the road, all of a sudden there's nobody on the road, right? I mean, there are a lot of people on bikes. Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. A few thoughts. First, how do we get the deep thinkers in China to stop torturing and murdering elephants, rhinos, pangolins, and the other animals that they're very efficiently helping us take to the very edge of extinction worldwide? How do we deal with the worldwide news blackout about Fukushima, poisoning the world? And what about the elephant in the room, the hijacking of the White House, sending us back to the age of the caveman with the Paris Accord, etc.? And last but not least, my favorite Big Island pet peeve, I really feel that there's more Roundup spraying in public places than ever, and as a paddler, they're down there spraying on Gila Bay all the time. People are not speaking out enough about that. So there you go. Thank you.
Okay, well, in a way, when you're asked, you know, what are we doing about the public's interest being compromised because of public spraying of what might be potentially unhealthy poisons or unhealthy herbicides? And what are we doing about the injustices that are being perpetrated in terms of social justice in places like China? And what are we doing about the kind of consumption that takes place almost directly of wonderful animals that are treasures for the entire world? And these are this is a refrain of an activist. This is the refrain of somebody who has a conscience. It's a refrain, a repeated lament of somebody that's hurt by something that's wrong and unjust. So it's a beautiful lament. And, you know, it's something that the world doesn't hear enough about. But if you do it in desperation, or you do it in a way that is unrealistic because you are also suggesting, and I don't think you are, but you're also suggesting that there's no hope and that the bad guys are going to win all the time and that sort of thing, then I don't think you would still be as committed as you are right now. So let me just say that to call out injustice is a step that's necessary. And sometimes you don't get to go beyond that because you lose your life. I mean, I had a pin that I used to wear till it fell off that was given to me by the World Wildlife Foundation of India, and I wore it because of a worker who was the colleague of the group that helped me get to this tiger park. He was a colleague and he worked for the World Wildlife Foundation, and he exposed the illegal deforestation of tiger habitat, and he was assassinated. And somebody else stepped up. The guy who was working with me stepped up and took his place. So, you know, the life that we have is short. So you can spend it in denial by thinking everything's fine, or you can spend it in denial by thinking everything's terrible, or you can get into it. The challenge, the adventure of doing your best whenever you can. Yes, sir.
First of all, thank you. I don't have to, I'm a part of the millennial generation. I can't speak for all of them, but I can speak for many who do share like opinions with me. It's encouraging to see someone of your age and your stature talking about this stuff, so thank you. And I know there are many people in the courts that have good intentions and are trying to do good work, but it's not optimistic from our perspective. And as far as activism is concerned, being actively participating and trying to change the way corporations basically commit scourges on the earth with slaps on the wrist. Recently in Standing Rock, the full weight of the judicial system came down on climate activists. Climate activists are tried for domestic terrorism. What are the courts doing, and how are they dealing with activists who are out there trying to do physical, real things? Because marching doesn't do anything.
That's not true. That's not true.
Well, Trump did exactly the opposite of what the Women's March wanted to do.
We're not done.
The point is, okay, maybe it does do something, but it's not enough. Marching isn't enough.
It's not enough.
It's not enough, but we can't go further than that, because activists are treated extremely harshly, the general population extremely harshly in the court system. So I just want to know.
Well, we get back to this idea of the lament of somebody that doesn't let it go, that makes your agenda bigger than yourself. So, when you talk about the injustices that are still being perpetrated, and you're having that conversation, don't give up on the most powerful part of your contribution, which is to figure out how you are not going to let it happen. And I can see you're working on that. But let me give you an example. 300,000 people marched at the time that they had the World Conference on Climate Change in New York, and it got the head of the United Nations out there, along with people like Leonardo DiCaprio. That march is in the papers all the time. Then, when COP21 happened, 600,000 people all around the world took to the streets. And then you think about Gangnam Style. Gangnam Style, have you heard of that song? Gangnam Style was one of the most amazing events in human history because it went viral, right? And it became the most popular song in the world in about 3 months. Things went viral with Barack Obama. That's how he got elected. Because people like you said, oh no, we are not going to be displaced. We're going to get together, we're going to use the internet to communicate with people that think like we do to raise money. And then you ended up with the President of the United States in a position where he is criticized because he's impractical, he's inexperienced, he's a complete, if you will, he's a complete egomaniac because all he does is issue these sort of statements that sound good but doesn't have any commitment behind it. Why? Because he was a community activist. He didn't have a job. That's not a real job. He didn't really understand the reality of making a living because he's a community activist. Okay, my point is you can make a big difference, you know, and Barack Obama did, despite the fact that people said that he really wasn't relevant or significant or knowledgeable enough. Something is going to happen on the internet. I can predict. Something will happen, and it will have a lot to do with the next, you saw Thurgood Marshall, it'll have something to do with the next, name the hero, Oprah. Oprah was the most popular woman in the world for a long time. And maybe to some extent she should have been popular, but there will be somebody that gives their life for the environment or for climate change, or there will be somebody that stands up from a rural village in India or some rural area of Hilo. And what they say will be like Gangnam Style, because it has a receptive audience. People are dying. You know, when I was in Korea, there's this huge movement that started because of an app on the telephone, because the professors who felt the way you did, young, smart professors who weren't making a lot of money, but they had children that they cared about, and they were making commitments to their country. And the same thing was happening with many of the lawyers. They got an app that showed how dirty the air was. So dirty that they had to go out and buy masks for their children. That basically went viral. They are organizing to make sure that something's being done about carbon. Now they're very, very frustrated because really their carbon blows over from China. But they didn't say they're giving up. So I congratulate you on being so concerned, but there are solutions out there because of so many people like you that are your age that are just watching. You're being displaced, you're not being paid attention to. I mean, really? Your planet has to have carbon in the air? It's going to get through to enough people that this law that was passed that said we're getting off carbon for energy in Hawaii in 2045 is not going to be seen as, you know, an outlier. It'll be seen more as a commonplace tool that society's using to create solutions. If you think about the size of the state, we have 1.4 million people. If you become a lawyer, you can do a lot. If you don't become a lawyer, if you're just a father or just a citizen, you can do a lot. But you've got a long life ahead of you in a small state. So I would say, keep it up. I mean, you know, you can do it.
One person you make it.
Yes, sir.
I worked for many years on deforestation problems in Nepal and anti-illegal logging in Indonesia and trying to stop the burning of timber for the planting of palm oil plantations. And we made had a little bit of success in Nepal, but barely any in Indonesia. But you know what is worse? The fact that the administrator of the EPA is allegedly a climate change denier, along with the president. That can happen in this country makes it seem like we're not making much progress at all. Now, your example of the wall at Oahu for mitigating sea level rise is an indication that it's going to take the whole world to save Hawaii and the rest of the world. Therefore, if we are going to lead, it can't just be here. We have to have an impact on Washington and Europe. And I think there needs to be some sort of a political rising about climate change. And maybe climate change denial should be made illegal. Seriously. I mean, if they can outlaw slavery, why not make climate change denial illegal? We have to rise up. I think the professor here is right. We're at the inflection point.
Well, yeah,
so
that's not.
I think one thing that you have to do. You're doing really well right now, but I think you need to retweak. I think you need to tweak your presentation. I think it'll be much better. It was a good presentation, by the way. But I think you need to tweak it. You know, we're in trouble. We have to rise up.
So your suggestion is that it be more clear about the dangers we're facing.
Yeah. And the timing is a little slow from our perspective.
And a call to action. It needs a call to action. It was a very nice talk, but there was no call to action. There wasn't. These are the things that you can do. These are the ways that you can get involved. Because, you know, we've all heard an inconvenient truth. We've all heard the nice talks. We've seen the nice slides. But what we need now, I mean, it's a fait accompli. Things have already started happening. There are already islands underwater in the Pacific. There are already huge swaths of coral reefs that are bleached. There are already, you know, we have ships going around the Northern Passage now where it never could in the past. You know, it's a fait accompli. It's already happened. And the thinking that we can somehow manage our way out of it is ridiculous. you know, it's just talk. But there's things that we can do on a personal and an individual group level, and it's that call to action that we all need. Plant a tree, clean some trash, clean a beach, change your diet.
Learn how to gondolier between the hotels and Waikiki Beach.
Well, thank you for the feedback. Yes, sir.
Yeah, just a comment adding to the call for action. Michael Moore said at the Women's Day March in New York, he said, what we've all got to do, we wake up in the morning, brush your teeth, have your coffee, and then call your representative, call your senator, get involved, do something every day. And let me tell you, I've been doing that. I mean, I'm 74 years old next week. I'm not going to see 2045, probably. Norway is planning on banning the sale of internal combustion engine vehicles 2025. I mean, 2025. 2045 to me is too long. I ain't going to be there. You'll be there. Good for you.
And I guess everybody heard that, you know, if you do something every single day, like call your representative, then things are going to change. And let's follow up on the idea you're talking about, you know, what's going to happen in Norway where they're going to, and we think of Norway as a very transparent society with a strong legal system and strong governance. But think about India, which we think of as, you know, much more chaotic. Well, the administration there is now moving forward to ban fossil fuel burning cars. You know, it's hard to predict these things, but
you can lease an electric car in Hilo for $360 a month, and it's got no gas cap and it's got no tailpipe. Now, that's not for everybody. I mean, you hit it on the head. Live close to where you work, and then you can walk or you can bike. I mean, we live in Volcano Village. It took us 30 miles to get here, but all downhill in an electric vehicle, and we've got solar panels on our roof now. Admittedly, we're retired and we can afford to do that. It's not for everybody. But that car is running on sunlight. I mean, give me a break. That's fabulous.
yeah. We need to get somebody that hasn't asked a question. So let me, in the back, yes, sir.
It seems like a lot of the things that link all these various questions, deforestation and stuff, is property, right? Like, no one wants their factories shut down because, you know, that would be bad for business. But you need to shut a lot of the factories down, obviously, to cut back on pollution. Or maybe we need to reforest, which takes land away. And in China, they have a little bit easier of a time doing that. And here we have eminent domain. So there's structures in place to do that kind of stuff. But what are your thoughts on that? The property kind of seems to stand in the way, private property, of the environment.
Well, the question was, does private property stand in the way, I guess, of being able to institute policies that will take care of climate change? And you can see what's happened with the idea of property. Property isn't owned in a way that is completely proprietary, so you can do whatever you want with it. I mean, we accept that now. But there was a time when it wasn't accepted. If you want to have your property as a storage site for industrial waste, it's your property. Well, we've advanced way beyond that. If you want to try to use your property for industrial purposes where it's not zoned that way, you know, zoning makes a big difference. So the fact that we have private property, I don't think necessarily stands in the way. And depending on how you look at it, you know, this world economy might be able to work with the idea still of capitalism in a way that adjusts so that we get carbon out of the air, if you assume that we have industries that can do that.
Like we have in Indonesia and Brazil.
Yeah, and in places like Brazil, there is a strong movement, a very strong movement to try to protect the rainforest and get rid of corrupt politicians. I mean, the struggle is there, fortunately. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, so I think that everyone here is talking about mostly like individual calls to actions, like that each one of us can do. And I'm just wondering, and on your side of things, I feel like you're preaching to the choir here a lot with this whole topic in general. And are you having these same conversations with people who aren't in this mindset? You know, people are in our representatives and senators of white states, since we are here, and other people like larger businesses and things like that who may not be in line with that thought process.
Great question.
Yeah, the question, I think everybody probably heard it, about what kind of audience gets this kind of presentation.
Yes.
Yeah. Yes.
And can you give an example of those types of conversations of who you're speaking to about that?
Yeah, I mean, I've spoken to legislators about it, but they're, in saying that, I don't want to make it sound as though the legislators that we have now are equipped to understand this. When I do speak to a legislator or speak to somebody that is involved in a business that is a carbon-producing business, there's a natural defense. You know, there's a refuge to deny climate change. There's a refuge that's taken by many people whose interests are going to be compromised. And I'm not surprised at that, but it's good to have the conversation just to see what sort of a response there is. But overall, I would say that many of the leaders in the community that are political leaders, of course, they're interested in doing what their constituents want. And as time goes on, the constituents are making demands like an environmental corridor, this legislation that has to do with moving to renewable energy. And we have legislation that has been passed a long time ago to protect things like our conservation lands. So you have to understand that the dialogue is continuing, but if you're interested in a response from me that says that this is the kind of conversation that is being seen as helpful in all quarters, I would say, no, it's not yet, but it's getting there, because there's much more of a, there's much more of a momentum, let's put it that way. You've probably noticed this, but a really interesting thing for you to keep in mind, because you are obviously on this issue in a very committed way, since you're still here at 8:50 at night. So we all are. So let's think for a sec about something that's happening that's very powerful in terms of raising the consciousness of climate change. It's the information cycle. An information cycle in the media. When you get a self-sustaining cycle, it's very helpful. Now, here's an example of a self-sustaining media cycle that affects the way that we govern. We in the United States are told that we're in danger all the time. If you watch TV, you see the serial killers. If you watch TV, you see the sensational crimes. If you watch TV, of course, you see terrorism. And then we had 9/11, which everybody watched on TV. So the amount of money that has moved into law enforcement is extraordinary. The biggest transfer of public funds for law enforcement that ever occurred took place within a couple of months of 9/11. What is my point? There isn't an advertising agency, a marketing company, a professional group that's trying to help those that are selling weapons, trying to help those that are in the business of building prisons, trying to help those that are raising money for police forces, because there's a self-sustaining cycle. If what you want to do is promote a new industry, say for example a new industry being solar for cars, you still probably have to go out and hire somebody to help you. But if you're talking about climate change, now if you watch the papers 2 or 3 times a week, climate change is being described as a problem, and sometimes an epic problem. Right? And we're all trading stories about how bad it is. Part of the reason we're trading stories is not because we have special knowledge necessarily. It's a popular thing now. So, what's my point? The point is we're getting there. Now it's clicked in. It's a self-sustaining cycle globally that the journalists have picked up on, that social activists have picked up on, that has to do with the fact that we are doing what you're talking about, which is having a dialogue now with the leaders. Now, Hawaii is a strange place. As I say, we've got one of the worst natural resource management programs in the United States, although we have heroic people trying to do something about it. How did that happen? It happened just because the leadership that we have doesn't know what it means. They don't know what it's supposed to look like to have funding so that you can, for example, protect watersheds, because it's not part of their radar screen. So I think that these folks that in the legislature, for example, continue to contribute money for law enforcement are going to start moving more money into climate change. And I'll give you an example of it. When the legislature opened, the brochure that was passed out to everybody when there was a opening of the House of Representatives had as one of the three major issues sustainability and climate change. Now, that is an aspiration. You know, we've got a couple of aspirations in Hawaii that have been here a long time. If you went to public school and you hear somebody say, you know, we are committed to good public education, you realize that's an aspiration. It's not authentic. Same thing with natural resource management. When you hear people say, we love Hawaii, it's a beautiful place, you know, we really think it's important, and it turns out they're a legislator, it's not authentic. But it's changing. The number of people in the legislature that are focusing on these issues is starting to increase. Young people, millennial type people. This is a small legislature. There are 25 people in the Senate. The leadership in the Senate right now, they hardly ever talk about climate change or natural resource management, but the leadership is getting smaller, and the minority is getting bigger of people that care about these issues. All we need is 5 or 10 more, then they'll be in charge of the Senate. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, I think that there are a lot that we can do. We hear him, but really, for example, in the county council next week, they're discussing the budget. This whole compost program is major in terms of climate change. Compost absorbs carbon. Compost reacts, deters drought. You don't have to water as much. Compost is this. The mayor slashed it. It was killing the bill, and we fought to get it back. You take a look at like the coral legislation on the state level. We move that, and all of the legislators are blocking the hearings, have blocked the hearings, and we fought against it. We finally got McKelvey to let a bill through, and he got eliminated as chair 2 days later. There's things that are right here, or even in terms of mass transit. Last term, we gave money to work on mass transportation, so we would do hubs and have bicycles and this. I haven't heard anything about it lately, but we can go next week, whatever it is, Wednesday, Tuesday, and make a pitch. Or call the people in the state. They are all totally spineless. Like McKelvey said, I was told I have to kill this. I was told I have to kill this. They just block things. So, but it really is, he can't be there doing all of that lobbying, but everyone here can do that.
I have to say that, and Chris alluded to some of the things that we've been involved in. Everybody in this room, I would say, gets involved in these issues because of reasons other than you're going to win. It's just something you feel like you've got to do.
It's the right thing to do.
Yeah. But with that said, you get fooled sometimes, if you will, or happily surprised is probably the way to look at it, in some of the struggles. But I think that it's such an exciting thing to hear about your dialogue with the leadership, where they have to continually reveal that we can't afford to pay attention to the environment. Don't you understand? We have other things that we've got to invest in, and they're not doing it so they get rich, and I don't think they're doing it so they can get famous. They believe in those priorities, but at least we're getting to see that so that the millennials can see it. When I went to Kailua High School, we never even used the word environment. Now, if you graduate from, don't even graduate from Kailua High School, you know what it is. And the millennials see the information cycle. And they see that their planet is, and this is the first time I've been before an audience that said, you know, you're just watering it down too much, you know, it's not that interesting, let's get to the reality of what's really happening, it's great, but that's sort of what's happening. I mean, you and I are not millennials. So imagine there's so many millennials like you that are fed up, that say, get the carbon out of the air. What's the big deal? You're not asking that women be treated equally. You're not asking that people be allowed to practice their religion in a way where they show self-respect. You're not asking that it's important for people to be able to give their opinion in favor of, you know, an unpopular cause. Those are tough issues. Abortion, guns. I mean, you know, these are things that have a real downside from the point of view of some people. But getting carbon out of the air, it just doesn't have the downside that social issues have in so many people's minds. You're not going to heaven, when you're not necessarily going to hell, if it turns out that you want carbon out of the air. It's, you know, something that spans religions, it spans economic classes, it's just, so that's why I think we can move quick on this issue eventually when the millennials get more organized. Yes, sir.
You're talking about, like, the main thing is getting off of fossil fuels and getting the carbon out of the air, but there's a lot of money against that. The oil companies and the coal industries have the ear of our president now. They have, there's huge powers against us. And living in America and being an environmentalist, it's hard not to be a hypocrite. Because everything around you is run by the petroleum industry. Like, even all the food we had today, the little bottles we had, all the things, all made by globalization and petroleum. It's all intrusive, and it's really hard to see an escape from this. We want to, like, lobby the governments to push the corporations to be greener and stuff, but we've been doing this since...
But you're going back to the point that was made a little earlier about how we're talking about window dressing right now. We need to make very serious changes that make it clear through the law, for example, that we're not putting carbon in the air, or where we have a tax structure that makes it clear we're not going to put carbon in the air.
But there are
and so getting to that threshold point where instead of just talking about it, things actually evolve, it's unpredictable. But it's going to happen during your lifetime, I'm virtually certain. Here, look at what's happening with the oil industry. Is the amount of petroleum being sold in the United States going up? Is the amount of alternative energy or renewable energy in the United States going up? And if you are a financier who has no, let's just say, I mean, all financiers have soul, but let's, from the point of view of just a scenario, you're a pure profit financier without a soul, that's all you want. Petroleum is not going up, alternative energy is. Here's an alternative energy industry that's being promoted by this United States Senator that's good friends with this president. I think as a financier, I might start investing in alternative energy. So, it's too bad. I mean, you know, Donald Trump right now doesn't think that alternative energy is a good idea, but he is a person who wants to, I guess, win. Maybe that's what we're looking at. And you know, China is, I'm just saying, China could get his attention. Because, you know, the idea that, okay, that's fine, you stick with all of your fossil fuel and watch what's going to happen. So it may be that industry really starts coming around more and more as time goes on. Who hasn't asked a question? I guess you haven't.
I want to verify about, this is a very important point that you just brought up. The Achilles heel of the corporate oligarchy is their investors. And when you go in marches and make enough noise in the media, you utilize the media and bring the issue out. If they get enough bad press, their investors will walk away. Monsanto, McDonald's, Kmart, all these big corporate things, their market shares are plummeting as we sit here. Why? Because the media and grassroots, you and me, common people, have stood up and said, we ain't buying it.
But what you have bought are things like telephones from Apple, and you use the internet that Google uses, and it just turns out their leadership, they're not really fossil fuel leadership. I mean, they want energy being used to run their computers, but that sort of brings up the idea of in 20 years, when you're still here, how many of these big petroleum companies are still going to be here? And how many new Apples are there going to be, or Googles? I mean, these things change depending to a certain extent on public needs. And the needs that are going to be taking place that have to do with climate change are going to be pretty profound, because people are going to be insisting that, for example, carbon not be in the air, or they'll be looking at, you know, when you think of a person that smokes, I don't mind, I think people are good people that smoke. There might be a smoker in here. But you know what I mean? If you think of a smoker, you don't necessarily want to marry the person or hang around with them that much. There's just sort of a social thing that goes with it. Now, when you're around somebody who really is into carbon, it might be something that really isn't that cool anymore, right? Especially if people like
They hang out
Angelina
together.
Jolie or Leonardo DiCaprio are telling us that that's not the right thing to do. You know, the ultimate icons so far are not icons that have broken from the political realm into the popular realm, right? We have movie stars that break into the popular realm, athletes that break into it so they can be elected or whatever. But the climate change person who breaks into the popular realm as a hero is really going to have a big constituency, I think, right? And Barack Obama was sort of there. Yes, sir.
I mentioned something I read today.
Okay.
Tesla is they're up 11.8% in their quarterly profits as of today sometime. So that's kind of a good indicator.
Yeah.
Maybe they'll start making cheap knockoffs in China.
Right, and we don't know what Google's investing in. Google has so much capital, right? But I don't think they're investing in fossil fuel things. You know, maybe robots, but they might be investing in nano, because, you know, some of their investments have had to do with wind. Hundreds of millions of dollars in wind energy. They might be investing in nanotechnology that goes along with solar. I mean, there's a lot of capital in places like that that's being used in ways we don't quite know about yet. Yes, sir.
I wanted to just make a comment. It's not exactly related to everything we're talking about, but I think that we need a venue change or a different perspective. Because if you look at the Model T, you know, one man Ford made the Model T, everyone had to have one. And so in the end, we all have at least one, some more than one. But what we don't have at home for each one of us in our own independent way, I bought this, it's mine and it works, is home, personal, electric generation.
Yeah.
And I feel like when we come to the place where every solution we talk about is billions or trillions or at least millions, we need to be able to sell the poor guy a $3,000 generator that he will never have to pay electricity again.
Right. A solar
Where is
generator.
it?
A solar
I
generator.
think Tesla is our
Yeah,
hero.
a solar generator, right. I mean, there are things like decentralizing the energy system.
You
It
get
looks
off the
like
grid, you
there's-
cut down on how much copper is spread around this, polluting us.
Yeah.
Community-owned grids.
Well, we have to go home pretty soon. Because I've got to get up in the morning and fly back. So
Thank you very much.
let me,
more comment would be thinking back on when Mayor Kim made the buses free. And if we had a lot of buses going all the time, maybe a lot of us wouldn't need a car. Anyhow, thank you, and thank you all for coming, and please keep coming so that we can keep the conversations going. Okay, aloha.
Thank you.